Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Fortified Life podcast, where we are passionate about developing a dependency on Jesus in the marketplace. I'm your host, Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify. Every week, we have the opportunity to bring on coaches, speakers, authors, all kinds of people making an impact for the kingdom of God in the marketplace. It's no different this week. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I am very excited for our guest. She is a powerful woman of God. Let me tell you a little bit about her before we get into the conversation. Becca Spradlin is the founder of Onmission Advisors, and they specialize in executive facilitation, organizational assessment, strategy design, execution, and change management. Becca started on mission to help Christian business and nonprofit leaders define, protect, and champion what matters most in light of eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Fortified Life, Becca Spradlin. Becca, what's going on?
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Becca. Now, Becca, I've offline, and we were talking a little bit before we got started. When someone goes through your bio, they're like, "Oh my God, like this lady, God has graced her with a lot of different gifts and talents, and she has a wealth of experience." But Becca, I like to ask all of our guests because I feel like in life, everybody sees like the end product. They're like, now they're the best-selling author, world traveling speaker, and you know that it's been a road and a journey for everyone. So take us through
Right.
your professional background and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like you and maybe many others listening, I feel like the Lord has led me on a niche vocational journey that only He could design. So looking back where you see how God equips you for things, but when you're going through it, you're like, how does this all piece together? Um, I was a business major, so I knew going into college, I wanted to be doing business in the business space. But then midway through, I got to do a missions trip. I did one to Guatemala, I did one to Haiti. And when I saw the poverty in these countries, that
Mm,
was kind of a turning point for me. And I decided, I want to stick with business, but how can we use business to alleviate and help with this issue that's prevalent around the world? So I went and kind of discovered microfinance. So
mm,
small business loans, small loans to people, really common outside of the US. And that became of interest to me. And God allowed me to get a job in this space. And for about 5.5 years, I worked at a specialized microfinance rating agency. Not many of
mm,
those on the planet, but I got to work with them and do research, both on the microfinance institutions like these banks in country, but as well as the investment flows going into
mm.
the market space. So it was really, again, a niche opportunity. Wonderful. Loved it. Learned so much. And then through that, I got to learn about and connect with an organization called Hope International. And they actually pair the good news of Jesus with microfinance and saving services and serve
Wow.
around the world in so many countries I can't keep track. Um, and anyway, reached out to them to sell rating services at my prior company, and they followed up saying, "You should come work here." So apparently, I wasn't very good at sales, but the Lord led us to move up to central Pennsylvania, and we have been here, goodness, 12 years now. So we never left.
I love it, Becca. You said a few things there. You talked about the turning point when you went overseas and you saw the poverty. I've always been amazed, Becca, when people travel outside. I think sometimes out here in the West, we get
Mm.
used to a certain way of life. What is it? And you can describe your experience, but what do you think it does for someone when they go out and they see how society is in another country? Like, what is it about that experience that causes you to step back and go, oh, wait a minute, like, hold on. I'm
Right.
not just out here in central Pennsylvania or down here in
Right.
northeast Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm at. Like, whoa, their life is a little bit bigger than that. What is it about that experience that kind of does that for people?
Oh my goodness. Well, so many things. I think being outside your comfort zone and even the norms.
Mm, it's good.
And I think you can even experience this in the US because there are a lot
Hmm.
of places in the US, you know, that are just different than maybe where you're living right now. So certainly in the US you can experience it, you can go overseas and experience it, but I think getting outside of what you know and that comfort zone,
Hmm.
um, certainly as a family too, I think whether you're going to a similar income country or lower income country, just getting out of the US and getting to a different context is a really bonding experience,
Mm.
because it is so different and because the only thing is each other. So
Hmm.
so many things there, but I think I strongly encourage it. Being in places and spaces that are look and sound and smell different than what we are used to is really important because we're so busy in our
Yeah.
lives, right? We're not even looking at our own neighbor. And I feel, challenged and convicted by this a lot. How do I love my neighbors who maybe have a very different, life experience, economic experience, all of it than I do? How do we maintain open eyes to that? And I think certainly those moments where you can intentionally get outside of your comfort zone, block off time to do that. Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself, a lot about life and about the world for sure.
That's good, Becca. Well, while you were saying that, that reminded me when you get outside your comfort zone and you're also spending time with different people, it also, you develop that empathy and sympathy
Mm,
for people because you were right there with them. When you
right,
sit in and break bread with someone,
right.
it's very difficult with all of the different, there's a lot of hatred and things going on in different parts of the world, but when you break bread with someone, it's really hard to dislike them.
Yes.
It's like we're not going off, there's no stereotyping, we're not going off
Right.
prejudice. It's like, no, I sat down, we had a meal, we talked about life, we talked about family, we talked about values. And I've always found that so unique when I've done it too. It's like, listen, no, I went and I sat down with this person, I looked them in the eye, they looked me in the eye, and we just shared our stories. So thank you
Mm-hmm.
for highlighting that for us. Sometimes when we don't get out of our comfort zone, we lose that opportunity to gain that larger context, which comes back to, like you said, loving your neighbor. So
Yeah.
my goodness, you're already preaching. You didn't even know you were preaching, Becca, but that's good. As they say, that'll preach. But Becca, the second thing you brought up micro financing. So I know you started smaller loans, but a couple of things. Talk about how come, and maybe it just could be different the industry that people are in or not
Hmm.
from an exposure perspective, but
Sure.
why isn't that talked about more than what it is? And then how does microfinancing kind of fill in the gaps
Sure.
in the business community?
Absolutely. So think about again, that experience was largely international. There is some of it
Mm-hmm.
happening domestically in the US, but it's really different here. So
Got
if
it.
you imagine places where you can't easily access credit, just think about how your financial products touch your life. You have a mortgage, you may have a car loan, you have a savings account, a checking account, everything on our phones. So we can easily move money, spend money securely. Now envision a cash-based economy where it's difficult to open a savings account, especially if you're lower income. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of money to put in there. Can the bank, make revenue off of your savings? Money just isn't as secure. And so places like this, it's amazing to see around the world the creativity. There are, church-based encouraged savings groups where you imagine the
Mm-hmm.
smallest credit union you could think of, 10 or 20 friends getting together, saving $1, a quarter, a week, a month, they
Mm.
decide, um, to more sophisticated banks that are really trying to serve people regardless of their income, whether they're a self entrepreneur. Um, and so if you're starting a business again in these economies where you don't have, where there just aren't jobs like there are here, um, getting loans so that you could start, maybe buy a sewing machine or buy some seeds to plant a field or equipment, That's really critical to helping see that whole economy flourish.
Mm.
So yeah, it's not as common here because we have such access to financial services, but in other countries, I mean, this is changing people's lives. So um,
Well, that's good. Thank you for that description, Becca. I feel like there's so many, in the business world, there's so many different types of products. So that's good. You mentioned international, dealing with populations that are, that may be unbanked or have,
right.
don't have as much access. So that makes a lot of sense on what the need is for
Mhm.
that type of customer or consumer. So thank you for that. Now, Becca, you are the founder of On Mission. Talk to us about the type of work your organization does and who they serve.
Sure. So, really, the work of On Mission developed unintentionally. I wasn't like setting out to start a consulting practice. But during my time at Hope International, right around the time I joined, so again, I came from a rating agency. I joined the organization is back in like 2013. And right around that time, the CEO, Peter Greer, published a book called Mission Drift, and I read it. I was really moved by it. It's such a great read in terms of case studies on nonprofits that have drifted over time, especially drifting from that Christian mission, those Christian
Mm.
eternal ambitions that they started with. And in the course of that, being released, I was asked to create an assessment that Hope could use internally across its different country offices on how would we detect if we were drifting. Not And in the
Oh,
CEO Peter was
wow.
words, it's not if but where we're
Where?
drifting. And so
Gotcha.
I always think about that. So in 2014 we started piloting these assessments internally, and then thereafter someone on the board said, hey, can you come do an assessment for our organization? Other people would read the book and say, could you someone come and do a workshop for us? So I want to make sure our board kind of understands this and that we're aligned. And so after a couple of years of these requests, which I hope was very open-handed, it's just part of the culture. So we would go and be essentially doing this consulting for other organizations. It got to the point where I, talked with Peter. I was just like, I think this could be something. Um, I think we could really, not just passively respond, but more actively serve people in this way. And so On Mission was really born out of that, out of just seeing this need and people wanting to avoid drift. So yeah, we help them define, especially most organizations have mission, vision, values, but
Mm-hmm.
we've had clients that feel like they've actually kind of drifted over time and they want to refine
Mm.
those, or they're looking to change those, but do so in a way that doesn't lead to drift. So
Mm-hmm.
doing those intentional processes, we also help them define like guiding guardrails, policies. So, we say this is the mission, this is kind of the core of what we do, but how do we actually articulate that? On the business side, it might flow to who do we partner with? What types of organizations might we give to or not give to, philanthropically? On the nonprofit side, there's just a number of ways, like how do we do hiring around this? How do we make sure our programs are aligned? So navigating how to both build alignment and actually put down on paper, like what are those guiding principles that will help us perpetuate this mission for decades to come, well beyond our tenure. And then we serve them with governance, strategic planning, kind of those supporting services as well, but all from this alignment perspective. How do we define, protect, and champion those eternal ambitions that the Lord has given you? How do we make sure that's really clear so we can all move forward aligned on that?
I love it, Becca. You have me nerding out because I love assessments. That's
Yeah.
just the nerd in me. But more specifically, Becca, I believe when it comes to assessments, there's a population out there in the business world where they're like, I mean, like, do they really do all of that or does it take all of that? And
Yeah.
so I've always thought of, and of course, there's so many different types of assessments, but I kind of, you've heard the onion analogy. It's like peeling back the layers. So I believe um, the exercises and coaching associated with them, not just, hey, take the test, boom, you're on your own, kind of floating. Um, how do you come alongside them and say, hey, okay, so we're working with you. We're not going to leave you floating adrift on
Right,
your
right.
own. We're going to come alongside you, but there's some real value because, and I love what the statement, it's not a matter of if, it's where. You know, where in the organization have you, or
Right.
what in the process? So, in coming alongside, and Becca, have you ever had a client or customer, just as a use case? You don't have to name names, where they
Sure,
were
sure.
they were a little bit skeptical, but then once you started getting in the day to day, the nooks and the crannies, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea." Just any cool stories about that type of experience?
Well, yeah, I think a core part of how we do both the assessments, but even if we're doing like strategy or guidance and guardrails, we always want to listen well and survey people ahead of time. So we usually do interviews and surveys as part of most of the services. And that's where, I think a lot of good practice, I think there's a lot of good practice in surveying people
Hmm.
as a great way of listening. I think bottom line, listening is important. If you're not listening to your teams or your stakeholders, start with conversations, start with surveys. These are great tools, but I always found it was that combination of the surveys, open-ended, closed-ended questions, as well as the interviews where we could really create a clearer picture for a client.
Hmm.
I would say we, see clients on a range of, I would just say just general organizational health or development. And so I think there's some that are very much in touch with this. So, ideally we might be looking at it from another way, but they're seeing a lot of what we're seeing. And then there's clients on the other side that have that like, oh, I didn't know that, it was a little more
Mm,
surprising. And I think that's usually reflective of their ongoing listening practices that are already
gotcha.
embedded there. But yeah, there's always something to learn and things that come to light when you listen well. And I think one of the things you mentioned, it's not just about like throwing out a survey or an assessment and then just getting that information, but follow up. I always am
Hmm.
encouraging clients like, what is the follow up we're doing? Because we need to close that feedback loop. If we don't close it, um, it can actually be kind of harmful from my perspective. I've worked with one client for a number of years, and I remember interviewing them maybe two or three times after doing consecutive assessments. And the guy I was interviewing, he was based in Africa. He's like, I pulled over to the side of the road to take your interview call because I know when I give you feedback, my organization hears it and responds, because they
Mm.
were so good about responding to the prior feedback that we collected from the prior mission alignment assessment. So I get encouraged when I hear clients doing that. And as a consultant, you can encourage it, but really seeing leadership own it and leadership care about listening. That's where you start to just see the wheels turning. You see improvement. It is really cool. It's cool to watch.
Mm. So good, Becca. We could that could be like its own other show, just diving in to the
Absolutely.
assessment. So, folks, you never know. Kind of like in the Avengers movies, Becca Spradlin will return at some point in the future. Becca, we've kind of been teeing this up as a culmination point in talking about your book. So, talk to us. You're a published author and with vast experience. Talk to us about your book, Lead on Mission.
Yes, I'll show it
Who is
here.
it, folks? For our people who watch on our YouTube channel, The Fortified Life, you can see Becca's book. We'll have links and everything. Trust me, you can get your copy. But Becca, what is the central message of the book, and what was the point that that God gave you that you were trying to get across in it?
Right. So the book Lead on Mission is really about what does it look like to cultivate faith in the marketplace, in the
Mm,
workplace, and how do we perpetuate it beyond ourselves? And
yeah.
so it's a blend of taking all the mission drift work. That's the problem our company exists to address. Is mission drift is the reality. There's always going to be resistance to those leaders and organizations that are trying to advance the kingdom of God.
Hmm.
So given this reality, what can we do to avoid drift? And so this book actually came out of a research fellowship opportunity that I got to do with Seattle Pacific University. And The research fellowship was around the case of the company Service Master, which
Oh
many of you are
yeah.
familiar
Yep.
with. And the book, The Service Master Story by Al Ayersman, was one of the core readings. And I'd read this book, and it's a really detailed kind of historical account of Service Master. And when I read it, I was like, wow, this is one of the most well documented cases of drift that I've seen
Mm,
in the marketplace. This company was founded in the late 1920s and with this ambition to honor God in the marketplace. And they were really intentional about doing it. They kept doing it even after they went public in the 60s. They had great succession planning in place. And so there was so much to learn from the decades where they stayed, on mission, but also a lot to learn as it unraveled over time. What were some of the causes? So that was one of the key kind of anchor case studies. There's multiple case studies throughout that kind of illustrate the different points of what are the levers to help us stay on mission as a business over
mm.
time. And that's, leadership, ownership, governance, alignment. Those are kind of the key themes that came out of the research. When you have alignment there, you can implement these faith forward practices, which is the gets to the application part in the second half of the book. You can implement those practices over time, and you can perpetuate the culture beyond you. So those are kind of the key pieces of the book.
I love it, folks. If you heard just those few minutes from Becca, if you can't tell by now, this is a must read. Not that you could read it if you have time. It is a must read. So, Becca, where can people get a copy of this book?
Sure. So Amazon is a great place to go. It's available on Audible as well. So for all those audiobook listeners, I am one of them. Go to Audible and get your copy there, and you can get copies on Amazon as well and other distributors, but that's usually the one people go to.
There you go. Yeah, Becca, before we get ready to go, we're in 2025 at the time of this recording. What are you excited about when you look out ahead for the rest of the year? Is there any sort of upcoming project or event or initiative that you or the organization are working on?
Yeah. Goodness. I feel like just sharing this message about the book and sharing these practices is really going to be an emphasis for us because we want organizations to not just sprinkle in faith in their work, but really figure out how to cultivate it. I think a key part of that is just a leader's personal abiding. So I
Mm,
would just encourage your listeners to just be abiding as the foundation for this. And I think something I'm excited about as I look ahead, even just the conversations we've had in the year already, is just about how does this apply to other things. So not just the business space, but our families,
yeah.
higher academia. These are some of the things I'm floating with. Like, how do we really reflect? How do we define, protect, and champion the kingdom ambitions the Lord has given us, not just in our businesses but elsewhere too? So that's something we're looking into, and I'm personally excited about as well.
I love it. That sounds like an awesome 2025 that is teed up for you, Becca. Becca, as we end, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us here on the Fortified Life. You have given nuggets of wisdom, you've given resources, and Becca, we are definitely going to have to do this again.
It would be my pleasure.
Becca, where can listeners go to find out more about you? You've already talked about the book, so we'll have that
Yeah,
link. But if they want to learn more about it, keep up with what you're doing and the
sure.
organization, where can people go to find out that information?
Yeah, so we're active on LinkedIn. You can follow me, Becca Spradlin. You can follow On Mission Advisors there as well. And our website is onmissionadvisors.com. Yeah, and you can always learn more about the book at leadonmissionbook.com too.
There you have it, folks. You heard it directly from the source. So you know exactly where to find out about Becca and all the things God is gracing her to do. Well, folks, that's all we have time here on the Fortified Life podcast. Becca, can't thank you enough. I was getting fired up about the things. I wish we could stay another 3 hours, but we know that we can't. But we could spread out 3 hours over a few different appearances. So, we'll just make do the little dog ear in the schedule, and we'll
Sure.
have to have you back on for sure. But thank you so much for hanging out with us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, folks, you know how we leave things. Don't compartmentalize your faith in the marketplace. And from the boardroom to the bathroom, God is with you. Remember, you can listen to The Fortified Life on all major podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon. And make sure for our YouTube audience, we really started doing this last year, but make sure you subscribe and like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Fortified Life. And it is a wealth of guests such as Becca that are in the archives. And trust me, God will bless you. So like us, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. But we'll see you next time on the Fortified Life podcast.